wondered how you can create strong partnerships and a customer pipeline to grow your startup? How about hacking your mindset to last through the long winters of the startup land? Well, you are at the right place. With the help of Colin House, we will dive into not just the tools to grow your startup, but also the hustler mindset that will help you push through. Colin House is a global director at Founders Institute, among many other things. Colin is an accomplished senior director, sales VP with extensive experience in building, selling, and positioning complex digital, cloud, and deep tech solutions, closing big deals, developing new markets, negotiating strategic alliances, and sales channels for growth, including startup and turnaround management. I can tell you one thing, you're in for a treat. Welcome to the Mary Poppins of Startups Live Show. I'm Nali Makangu from Athena Leaders. As a tech consultant and startup advisor, I will answer live the burning question that you have on your way to Series A Plus with the help of our amazing guest. Subscribe and tune in every week for top tips. More importantly, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Colin, welcome to the show.
Hi,
What is
Nelly. How are
what
you?
is it? I'm all right, thank you. How are you?
Or do I call you Mary? What's your preferred, Mary Poppins or Nelly?
I think Mary Poppins for the show
Oh.
sounds really good. I think more people should use it more often. First, I'm always really excited when I meet people who enjoy the slight digital nomad lifestyle as I do. So, can you tell the audience where you are today?
Yeah, I'm joining you today from Miami in Florida. I decided that I couldn't have another winter with cold feet, so I thought I'd come here instead for the winter.
Very good choice. I'm gonna add that to my list for next year. Now, for those of us wherever you are, where we still have our heating on, can you tell us a bit more about what you love about startup founders and working in the startup world?
It's a great question. It's almost where do I start? I think every single day I'm privileged to meet uh, dozens of startups. Sometimes it feels like hundreds of startups, and the energy, the vision, the creativity. Very often they've seen some kind of pain in their respective market, and they want to do something about it. You know, all of us want to fix the world in some way, but they've actually gone and done something about it. They got off their backsides. They're like, right, this is what I'm going to do. They find themselves, you know, in a podcast, listening to maybe to a podcast like this, or in Founder Institute, or or another accelerator or something like that. And all of a sudden, this idea, this pain that they've identified, starts to take shape and turn into a business. And I love that. I love that whole process.
Yeah, I can relate to that as well. I guess one of my favorite tagline is about dreaming, building, and then playing, which is actually going in there. But as you know from someone you've been involved in businesses and building things for so long, it can be quite a lengthy and lonely process. So what kind of advice do you give whenever you start working, especially with a first time early stage founder?
It's a great question. A great many of the startups I work with, often they need someone in their corner. They need someone that they can bounce ideas off, who perhaps isn't a staff member, or isn't an investor necessarily, who they're not afraid to make a mistake with. And there's at least half a dozen or so startups I work with on that basis. It's almost like, right, I'm your wingman. I'm gonna ask you some tough questions. I'm gonna just be there. And sometimes even just it can be a psychological shift. They've just been beaten up on an investor call, and it can be a right. Okay, what do you think went wrong there, or what do you think went right there? Let's work on that. Let's adapt that. Let's change your mindset from asking, please sir, can I have some money, to please ma'am, can I have some money, to I'm passionate about what I do, and so therefore I'm doing you a favor by offering you an opportunity to invest in this. And you can see the wheels turning and a click, and it really works. It really works. And also being a founder is super lonely. I've been there myself. Super, super lonely. Who do you who do you have to put an arm around you? And if I go back 20 years when I first had my first startup, I believe me, I could have done with someone maybe of my age now to put my arm around me back then and say, hey, yeah, don't do that. That's silly. That's that something's going to explode. Don't put your finger in that plug socket, or don't do this. Don't fall down that hole again. Um, and I think the ecosystem as a whole has now grown and developed so that there is support for people who do want to take that risk and take that jump. Back then, it didn't exist.
Yeah, I guess this is one thing I love about just being part of the startup ecosystem, especially the Cambridge one, and also in Madrid at the moment, and also remotely.
Yeah.
One of the things, when you mentioned working with investors, and I think that is something that gets asked a lot. It's very daunting and scary for a first-time founder, actually, even if you know a first-time founder, to really build that confidence and the mindset, as you've mentioned, of going out there and saying, I'm not begging or pleading, but this is a product that you want to invest on. So just when you're working with startup founders to get them there, what are some of the tools that you use to help them understand, even just to help them to set up their own expectations on what investors are looking for?
It's a great question. Look, every investor has their own kind of profile, what they're looking for. What I'm really trying to help founders focus on at the moment is that if you think about, the spectrum, my hands in the camera, if I focus on the spectrum of risk at the moment, if you as an investor want 5% return on your investment, then working with startups isn't it. Yeah, go off and put your money in a bank account. If on the flip side, you want to put your money in, I don't know, let's say a crypto platform, let's say something like FTX, and you want to, not FTX, you want to put your money over here, and there's great potential reward and massive potential reward and potentially massive risk if it's the wrong platform. Startups now represent almost this area. Yeah, it's certainly not low risk. Yeah, no one's ever going to say that. But equally, with a great startup, with a great team that's been through an accelerator, maybe an incubator, that's had all the tough questions asked of it, who may have some revenue, who may have, a bit of traction, etc., and they've got an identified market, then how risky is that to an investor? And this is the kind of question I'm now starting to repeatedly ask of investors. Like, come on, look, at the end of the day, if you're talking about investing in startups, a startup that's at Series B, Series C, and is now turning over $50 million, is that really risk? Is that really investing in a startup? Startups are down in the weeds where we are, Naily.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as you mentioned, FTX there, and this, I mean, there's a lot of money out there, but is it going to the right place? Even I was reading an article last night about the people like FTX, Elizabeth Holmes, that didn't really have to prove much, but managed to have a lot of money, millions and millions invested in them. Yet there are many startups that have already been de-risked through going to accelerators, as you've mentioned. So what is your strategy to kind of really spread that word to investors? Because I think that will benefit the rest of us on the early stage panel.
I think investors. I've just been on 2 investor calls this morning. Same investor, 2 different startups, and in fact, going back to the previous point about how do you prepare a founder for their first investor call. This was one of these guys, it's their first investor call. So we worked through the script together, we worked through a story, we worked through, not 100 slides of War and Peace. I wanted this person's character to come through because I knew that the characters in the room were all going to get on. So we kept the slides down to almost like 10 slides, told the story with the slides, and then opened it up to Q&A as quickly as possible. Now, that doesn't work all the time, But for that person, I knew there was going to be a fit there. For the second group, it was more slides, more presentation, because that company has more traction, for example, and the investors wanted to drill down into what kind of traction that is and what new market opportunity there are. So within the course of that 1 hour, within that 1 hour session, there's multiple ways that you can play it. But this is why, startups who are going directly to an investor and don't know that kind of thing, that's sometimes where they fall over. Yeah, sometimes they do a great job, but then having advisors on the team, who've been there and done it and made the mistakes and fallen in the holes and stuck their finger in that plug socket, etc., and made the mistake already, which I have. That helps a lot.
And what is your secrets to kind of getting into the soul of the people you work with to get their story out? One of the things I've seen a lot with some of the startups that I work with or help is that, especially when you come from a non-sales or marketing background, especially when you come from a tech background like me,
Yep.
we love to be so factual, right? It's about the facts, it's about the functionalities and all of that. And the storytelling element, which is really important, it doesn't really come naturally for us. So how do you kind of, when you work with people, you try to get them to change their mindsets, to embrace that aspect of themselves that they might not have discovered before?
It's funny. It's actually something that I've had to learn myself, because I'm actually quite technical myself. And back in many years ago, 200 years ago, etc., I was super technical. So, but I could also tell a story, right? And I could also see a gap in the market. And so everyone I work with now, and to be honest, it's probably the majority of founders that I work with who are tech founders, who traditionally focus, like you rightly say, on feature function, ones and zeros. I try and get to lift them out of that and focus on what's the vision, what's the problem that you're trying to solve. Let's align that to your story, because typically a founder's vision is aligned to some kind of pain that they've observed or have experienced directly. And then from there, really start to do the storytelling and then get to the outcome as well. Because I think, and even if I think about this in big corporate, B2B SaaS sales, multi-million dollar deals, still you see lots and lots of tech companies leading with feature function. Now, to my mind, that's boring. That's easily copyable. If I put my tech hat on, it's like, well, you're just a database with a fluffy bunny front end on it. Where's the outcome? And what's the outcome you're trying to drive? If as a startup I can show that I'm going to improve revenue for this company by 30%, then that's a great outcome. Or if I'm going to reduce the cost of doing business, of that company doing business, by 25%, that's a great outcome. So it's the storytelling and interweaving that with the metric of the outcome. That's really, really what I try and focus on, certainly with the tech founders.
Yeah, it's a really nice way of putting it. That's something I'm definitely going to send just this video to the people I work with, especially when it comes to storytelling, because I believe that focusing on the outcome and how you're going to help a company is really important. On that note, is it for me, for example, one of the things that really make me cringe, and my head should kind of blow up even more than it goes normally, is when I work with a tech. Especially, I think yours go much bigger than mine. For me, it's really when I work with a founder, especially I work a lot with tech founders that have invested a lot of time in building their product without speaking to the clients, because they understand they know what they want to build, but of course sometimes they miss the mark because they haven't really engaged with the clients. Is there anything like that you feel happens a lot that makes you go that makes your hair goes goes big? And yeah,
Look, we've all been there. We've all done it. And anyone who says they haven't done it is probably just forgotten or edged out of their memory the time they did do it. because we've all seen something and go, oh, that's broken. And if you are a hacker, if you are a coder, right, I'm going to do something about it. Or if you are a business person, right, I'm going to try and solve that without properly testing the market validation, because your single observation might be skewed. So ideally, what you want to do is have as much evidence around you, which gives you this kind of nice bell curve, of evidence. You're not looking for the edge case here or the edge case here, which you may have observed. You're looking for the bulk in the middle, and the bulk in the middle is where your business is. Yeah, and that's where your scalability is, and that's where the bulk of your customers are going to come from. So yeah, look, we've all done it, and there's a line in a movie, isn't there? Build it and they will come. I think it was
Yeah.
like a 1990s Kevin Costner baseball movie. He built the Field of Dreams, and believe me, no, they don't come.
Yeah.
You just built the perfect sunglasses case. So what? And I say this repeatedly, and sometimes it comes across as a bit rude when I'm speaking to a techie. Oh yeah, I've just built this and it's got bells and whistles, and I'm like, so what? Yeah, and then insert pause there and wait for flummoxed, like response. But the so what is really designed to try and get to the customer. So what's the outcome? And what I've just said here. So it's so what? How does it benefit humanity? How does it reduce greenhouse gases? How does it, if you're a bank, how does it improve onboarding? How does it reduce costs of doing business? So what? Yeah, is something that I think maybe sometimes it comes across a bit rude and obtuse, but it's one of those questions.
Well, like you said, you're the wingman, and it's up to you to. It's your responsibility really to kind of drive and ask those tough questions, because I believe that there are many founders, especially if it's a first time gig, that feels overwhelmed with all of those aspects of things, and that kind of takes us nicely to one of the questions that comes out a lot is in terms of getting new customers, and of course you have the B2Cs that could be, I won't say it's easy, but slightly easier because of the sales cycle and the B2B. How do you help startup founders when they are on their way to kind of start looking for their first customers?
So we talked about customer development. Prior to that is product market fit. So once we're assuming that they have product market fit and we've validated that there are customers out there, then we can start to talk about, okay, now how do we capture more of them? So there's a number of different ways, right? So we start to build out personas, almost like, okay, who's the perfect buyer? Who's the most likely person to actually buy this? And then we potentially create marketing around that perfect buyer. And that perfect marketing could be a series of email messages. It could be a script for a phone call. It could be a series of LinkedIn messages. It could be every single possible way that you could figure to get hold and get in front of that person, including, of course, advertising, paid advertising, and things like that. But ultimately, it's ultimately, in my opinion, finding your bulk. Remember the bell curve there? Finding this bulky bit here is something that even the more advanced startups fail on. Now, I've done a lot of work in Silicon Valley, in San Francisco. Everywhere here is blocks, right? And if you imagine a startup, and if you imagine the queue outside their front door, and that's their current business, yeah, you only really understand what the total opportunity is when you walk up to the edge of the block and look around the corner. Because once you look around the corner, you understand how much more business is coming that way. Now, I've seen Series A, Series B startups funded to the tune of 60, 70, 80 million dollars, raise that capital just on the base of seeing who's in their queue right outside their front door, not necessarily going up and having a peek around the corner. Yeah. And consequently, what happens? The startup, it starts to implode. People start throwing things at each other. You know, Elon Musk comes along and sacks everyone. I don't know, you know, or everything in between those two scenarios. You know, ultimately, you know, it's not as scalable, yeah, as everyone thought initially. So, so that's interesting. But if I come back to the initial question, right? Okay, so how do we find a customer? Well, where do your customers live? I mean, Nelly, where do
Yeah.
your customers live?
Well, LinkedIn, lots of forums that are based on startups, accelerators, all that's lovely stuff.
Exactly the place where many of my customers live. Yeah, so ultimately, starting to boost your profile as a person of influence. You know,
Mhm.
someone who is actually active in the ecosystem, who can not only be, you know, the friendly face of wonderful podcasts and startups and things like that, but also someone who's going to add value. Yeah. I was having this conversation just the other day with someone. We're talking about, oh, it's all about relationships and it's all about relationships. I said, whoa, hang on. You know, that's kind of going back to the 80s and the 90s. You know, yeah, everything was relationships, who you played golf with, who you hung out with in bars, etc. But now it's more about the value add that that relationship can bring. You know, so if I can make someone a superhero within their organization, you know, which I've been lucky enough and fortunate enough to do many times in my career, you know, and that person now started off as X and now is Y, yeah, that's a value added relationship. So if I can find those kind of people, the kind of people, we used to say, I was with a startup called Deep Coding, and the CEO, Sebastian, and I, we were constantly trying to find that person we could make a superstar. Yeah. So who can we find to make a superstar? And you articulated it perfectly. Where are they? Everyone's on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
If they're not on LinkedIn, well, okay, maybe you've got a different B2C type model, but certainly for B2B, everything's on LinkedIn. There's engagement tools on LinkedIn. There's automation type things you can do. There's all kinds of different things, but work on your profile. Make sure that you're a person of influence, yeah, in your area. And sometimes people start coming to you for advice. Offer, you know, office hours, mentor other people in your specific field. You know, over the last 8 months or so, I've done something like 200 office hours for Founder Institute. It's a lot of time and a lot of effort, but the wonderful opportunities that I now have are pretty much directly as a result of doing everything there for free. You know, so put yourself in and amongst your community, you know, whatever that community is.
Yeah. I love that. And I think, in a way, it actually sounds really, really good. But some people might say that it's actually harder than you think because of what goes into our heads. Because I think, I'm definitely up for reaching out to people and building my community online profile. And in fact, this is something that I learned the hard way myself over the last 3 years of building my business. And I think everything that you've said today, I can definitely resonate with the steps that I've had to learn and grow as I'm growing as well into this
Yeah.
world. But there are many people out there that still worry about just putting themselves out there, right? And why do you think that happens?
Um, there's so many different ways I could take the answer to that, Nelly. But I think the first thing is the successful people that I see are able to, even if it's not their core strength, articulate their own value proposition and articulate the value proposition of their company by telling a story. They might be, you know, they might be neurologically diverse. They might be, you know, not used to having to do that kind of thing. But ultimately, even if they're a hacker, even if they're a programmer, ultimately, if I can hear my granddad laughing here, he always used to say to me, Colin, if you don't blow your own trumpet, no one else is going to do it for you. Yeah, you've got to talk about, yeah, your value in this space. You've got to talk about why you're different, and you've got to talk about why Naily right now. Yeah, and I'm having these conversations on a daily basis. You know, and it is a psychological shit. Oh yeah, well, I'm not a salesperson. Yeah, is the typical objection I get. And I promise I'm not going to swear on your podcast. But
I'll
that's
go for it.
absolute hogwash. Let's use hogwash as a term. That's absolute rubbish. Yeah, because if you've got off your backside to create a startup, and again, I go back to my previous comment, you owe it to that person to tell them all about it. You owe it to the world. So if you believe in it, tell people about it. Have a conversation about it. And if I go to big business, just quickly, we're very metric driven in many big businesses. MQLs, marketing qualified leads, sales accepted leads, opportunities, etc., etc. And these conversion rates are highly measured and highly tuned. In the last startup I worked with, we removed all that, and it was just all about conversations. Yeah, and the more conversations you have, I guarantee, as long as the business is viable and it's a decent idea, the more conversations you have, yeah, the more revenue, the more sales, the more opportunity, the more leads, and so on and so on. The bigger your pipeline, and the more fun stuff that you're going to do. If you don't talk about it to people, how are they meant to know about it? It's
Yes.
again, it comes back to that psychological shift, Nelly. I used to use this in the past with us enterprise salespeople. In big corporates, you're used to having a team of people around you. One of the best people and best roles that's massively underrated are sales development and business development people who get on phones and do that. You can hear singing in the background. I think Spain have just beaten Costa Rica, so apologies for that. Um,
Brilliant.
and, one of the most underrated roles that there is, but it's one of probably the hardest role in sales. And very often I've had to ask these guys to just think psychologically, you're not asking for anything here, you're showing off. Yeah, you're giving this person on the end who doesn't know anything about the Mary Poppins of Startup show. Um, you're giving them the opportunity to hear all about this wonderful offer that's going to make the Mary Poppins show just so much better. So why would they not listen to that if they're truly invested in their own business? It's such a simple little trick, but it really works.
That's a very good question. And in fact, I'll be asking them as well, why are they not listening to the Mary Poppins of startups?
Exactly.
but yeah, so definitely, I think it's a really good point. The mindset shift that you need to have in terms of especially the business development and really putting yourself out there is very important. And in fact, this reminds me of a sentence or a quote that you said when we were doing our prep just for this episode. And you said that the result that you see today is based on the work that you did 6 months ago. And I think this really wraps up nicely what you've just mentioned and explained in terms of why it's important to really create your own personal branding, to be out there and to connect. Yeah. But for those who missed our very exciting private conversation, do you mind explaining a little bit why you said that and how we can help startup founders?
Yeah, where do I start here? So I think one of the words in the intro is the hustler mindset. Now, I'm not saying I'm a hustler, but because that has various negative connotations, but I do have a hustler mindset. As in, I think from a long line of hustlers. There's some family stories like during the Blitz, my great grandmother trying to shoot rabbits so that they can eat whilst the bombs are dropping, to feed the kids. And my granddad was a trader in the Covent Garden market, and I grew up around that kind of hustle, trying to do deals, etc. And I think it's taken me quite some time to realize that that's part of my success. As in, I very often don't take no for an answer, or a no means no, not right now. And also, very often in our life, in our world, we come up against these cast iron gates, and there's seemingly no way around those gates. If you look just to the side of the gate, there's a little wooden door with a rusty padlock. and that's your way through. I used to use this analogy in hacking. I used to use this analogy in sales development, in business development, and now I'm using it in startups. And it's totally true. You know, there's always a way until there's not. So, you know, how convinced are you that you've actually figured out all the different ways that there could possibly be to solve this problem, whilst taking in the amount of risk and the amount of investment required and all those kind of things. You know, so as long as you're forewarned and forearmed with all of the facts, then of course you are then able to make an informed decision. If you're able to make an informed decision, that could even be a no-go or a go decision on actually pursuing the business full stop. So this hustler mindset is really all about activity. Yeah. And if I think to my training, for example, at Microsoft, it's all pipeline. What's in the top of your pipeline that's going to shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink and ultimately turn into some kind of dollar, pound, yen type thing at the end of it, as in a sale? Yeah. And the more I fill my pipeline, the more stuff that I do at the top of the pipeline, you know, so for example, this is a pipeline type activity, both for yourself and for me. And ultimately someone might listen to this and go, oh my God, look, you know, Nayli's like, you know, absolutely fantastic. You know, let's sign her up. And, you know, that equates in revenue. So if you're selling into a large corporate, you need pipeline. If you're selling, and I'm stressing the word selling, if you're selling as a founder, your product or your concept, you need pipeline. And you need one pipeline here for your revenue, and you need another pipeline here for your investors. Yeah. So you build out investors and you hustle in terms of activity generated to create the outcome that you desire. And then you apply some very, very simple mathematics. And that very, very simple mathematics is all about applying conversion ratios to see how much activity, how many leads you need based on some simple conversion stats to get to the outcome you desire. So ultimately, Nelly, if you said to me, right, I want to buy a desert island, it's like, okay, fantastic. That's going to cost you $5 million. You know, if we work backwards from that, that's going to come from net profit. If net profit minus tax, etc., so you're probably going to need about what, $12 million of actual profit. If you need $12 million of actual profit in terms of revenue, yeah, you probably need what, about $24 million of actual revenue. $24 million at opportunity of 10 to 1. You need $240 million worth of opportunity in your pipeline right now to be able to have you afford to buy that desert island in some kind of time frame. You know? So
Yeah.
it sometimes can be a bit overwhelming because you work backwards and work backwards and work backwards, and before you know it, you go, oh geez, I need, like, you know, 164 billion leads, but it's typically not quite as dramatic or as horrible as that.
Cool. But you have to promise me one thing though. When I eventually buy my island, we're gonna have to grab a drink at on the island.
My time.
There you go. So one of the things that you're talking about, you know, when you talk about the top of the pipeline, one of the questions that I get asked a lot, especially for those who don't have a strong sales background, is what kind of things that they can do when you start thinking about, you know, as you're stressing the word sales, but earlier also mentioned business development, which is yet something that a lot of people see it as a gray area or a black box that they have no idea what to do. So in addition to just discussions, or how can you create those discussions without just pick up the phone and call?
Well, online is a natural place. You know, blogs, video blogs, article writing, blogs. There you go. Participation in community events. I'll give you an example. I pretty much got off the plane here in Miami about 8 weeks ago. I went to an event the next day. The first person I met at that event has got a business all around identity verification and other great stuff, based out of the Caribbean. He's doing some great work. He's now a client, and earlier today I put him in front of an investor. Yeah, that's just you. That's it in a nutshell. Yeah, if you put yourself in the way of opportunity, opportunities are going to come your way. If you go and talk to people, you pitch your business, you go to a pitch competition, you tell us, it comes back to activity, Nelly. It comes back to activity, conversations. It comes back to, if anyone hasn't read Guerrilla Marketing, which is like older than time itself, but it's still valid. Where you print off stickers and put them on lampposts, and where you kind of, do chalk drawings on the pavements and or anything else that, of course, is probably illegal. And don't do that. Don't try that at home, kids. but ultimately, think creatively. Just think creatively. There was one point in Brisbane in Australia. It was going to cost us $5 to acquire a new user for a new platform. Yeah. And I was like, well, that's ridiculous. That sounds super expensive. So I just drew out $200 and targeted a few young, lovely people to go and target people in their generation who would be perfect for the platform, and give them $2 in exchange for a sign up and a download. Yeah. So it went off and got 100 signups. No, not a lot, but it was enough for us to beta and us to get to actually to traction, get to investment. So you got to think, like laterally. There's no one way to boil the egg or boil the cabbage. Let's say boil the cabbage. It's the new one.
Yeah, and I like that kind of this idea of thinking outside the box, because sometimes it can be safer to do the usual, some ads here and there, some social media posts, but what else are you going to do to really put yourself in front of your audience? And especially when you do it differently, it also get people to notice you more because they are not expecting that.
Exactly. 100%.
When you were kind of describing this idea of finding your own little door in a corner there, how did you apply that when you were building your startups many years ago?
Well, funny enough, the story, this isn't a startup story, but this is a big corporate story, who bizarrely, really, at that point, were operating like a startup. So this is Microsoft in Australia back in 2006, 2007. I'd just been given, like 50 of the biggest retailers in the region to go and look after. The biggest one hated Microsoft with a passion, hated them because the mentality back then.
I'm sorry. I wish you told me that before. If you told me that before, I don't think we would have had this interview. But I let it go because I really enjoy our discussion. Go for it.
It's a good positive thing because we managed to turn it around. Because the perception of them back then was they turn up and ask for money. And at that time, with Office licenses and Windows licenses, it kind of was like that. It wasn't good. And from a hearts and mind, and from like the being told no, we actually camped out in their offices. I put a Microsoft flag up above a desk, turned it into a surgery, and over the course of 2 years, targeted every single business unit within that whole thing. I managed to do a massive deal for Microsoft, and a kind of deal that they're still trading on now, like well over 10 years later. So it's that kind of almost never say die attitude, that applies both in big business, in little business, in embryonic founder kind of land, in startups, in everything. And don't get me wrong, look, hey, Microsoft are a great business. Love you guys.
Yeah, so I'm not so in love with, well, I still love them, but not as much as before. It's when I was when I was young. I'm still younger. I used to have a thing for Microsoft. I think I was Microsoft addicted because I hated Apple. Anything Apple, no. And one of my supervisors in my first jobs, he was an Apple fan. So we always had this, fight between Microsoft and Apple. I don't touch anything Apple, and they don't touch anything Microsoft, which was quite good fun. But I'm glad to see how, using your own, guerrilla marketing techniques, you've managed to help them turn things around. And in fact, that reminds me as well, one of the things that I'm doing is trying to get more exposure is public speaking. And one of the things I've noticed is that it's really hard to get a public speaking gig in the UK, but not so much outside of UK, in Europe. So because I speak French, English, and Spanish, I just went to a conference in Madrid, South Summit, and I told them that I speak many languages and that will help them. And that was kind of my back door into public speaking at conferences. And now I use that when I go to like other
Yeah.
places. So I think it's really important to be able to kind of think a little bit about how to turn things around mentally to and find opportunities where it might not be seen, it's not glaring and attracting you.
Nelly, it's a great subject. I've got to. I'm not going to be careful, but equally, I'll be respectful of some of the people that I do business with in the UK. But um, the reason I'm here in Miami is opportunity.
Yeah.
And the hustler mindset doesn't necessarily work in the UK. The reason that you've had to do your talking gigs and things like that elsewhere might be a sign of some of the challenges, shall we say, in the UK of doing new exciting things. And I think that very often is reflective in the level of investment, or the representation, amongst minority groups. The fact that only I think 4% of female founders are funded. There's a tongue twister for you, which I think is shocking. It's just ridiculous, and I think the opportunity in the UK is huge, absolutely huge. But you still have some of these glass ceilings, and I see it as a personal, almost vendetta now to break through some of those glass ceilings. And if I have to do that partially from here to really show what's possible, with US type style investment, and others, to really, really pave the way. There's some great startups based out of the UK. There's some really cool stuff going on. I'm working with at least a dozen or so. Yeah, some of the stuff groundbreaking, really groundbreaking. So we've got some of the sharpest minds, some of the best innovation. It's that next bit. It's that commercialization, and it's the, having the hustle to go back to the title there, to then take it to the next level. That's what I think is missing.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I'm glad that you definitely, one of the people out there working to kind of break that glass ceiling, because I think I agree with you. There's just so many great minds and great ideas coming from the UK. And I also love the opportunity to be able to have a wider view, because I love to play. I love my job. So every time someone comes with an idea, I'm always like, yes, I wish I could just work on everything at the same time. That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is difficult, isn't it? Being
Yeah.
able to kind of focus is difficult. And, I represent other companies, more established companies, helping them with biz dev and helping them get into new markets. And, some of those guys are just absolutely awesome. Some great minds there, Stanford professors and things like that, and, they still potentially share some of the product market fit challenges in some of the markets. But the opportunity is everywhere. And for the individuals who are considering starting a business, who are listening to this, maybe after the fact, just go for it. Just go, just go for it, because you never look back. And even if it doesn't quite work out, don't think of it as failure. Think of it as a stop on your journey. Yeah, because no one knows what their destination is, but going through an accelerator, graduating, that's just a stop on the journey. Starting a business, failing is a stop on your journey. Yeah, dust yourself off, get back on the horse, do it again. And yeah, one of the best lessons I've ever learned is from probably the business that I had that didn't work.
And you're here today after many years, still doing some amazing things and working with so many amazing companies around the world.
Exactly. But back then, I did have a big perm and big hair like that.
Well, I think I will believe you when I see pictures. So I will find you on LinkedIn and hound you until you send me pictures of you with hair. That would be fantastic. So obviously, there's a lot of people who's been listening to you, and those who will probably watch the recording. How can they find you? Because I think they're probably going to have a lot of questions. And how can they track you down?
Well, apart from tracking me down here in Miami, which I'm always open to, I only do face-to-face meetings here in Miami, no virtual. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm there somewhere on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect. Send me a private message, etc. Happy to talk. Happy to discuss. I'm super busy doing a whole bunch of things, but I always open up hours, to hear new opportunity, new things, right? And I think we should all do that. We should all be listening out. And if you walk around, Nelly, you walk around with your head down, you're never going to see opportunity, because opportunity comes from above, right?
Oh, that's for sure. Thanks, Colin, for being such a great guest on our show, and it was lovely to speak to you. And thanks again to our audience. If you have any question for me, Colin, you know where to find us on LinkedIn, and you'll find more information in the show notes. We are currently we've just launched our one-to-one mentoring for that will focus mostly on tech and product. So if you are in early stage startup or wherever you are on your journey and you kind of want to bounce ideas, then please reach out to me and I will find you. Well, find all the information on my channels anyway. This one is not just me. I've also got some other amazing people in the tech sphere, whether it's those build the products, those build the software for you, but they will have a lot of feedback and pointers as you are growing on your journey. But do remember, dream, build, play. Let's design a happy and productive workplace playground together.